A 16-year-old cheerleader is found dead inside a bathtub in her own home. The investigation led officers to arresting a man who allegedly had no ties to the teen. We're breaking down what detectives learned about the suspect, who now admits he's the one behind the vicious murder. This is Inside the Crime, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. The victim's death rattled a tight-knit community in Texas as her family was hoping to see this case through in the form of a trial. However, a new report suggests they were furious when prosecutors reached a deal with the teen's killer. On December 5, 2023, 16-year-old Lizbeth Medina was supposed to attend an annual Christmas parade with the rest of her cheer squad. It was unusual for Lizbeth to not show up to events, and even more unusual for her not to respond to messages from her mom. According to her mom, Jacqueline, Lizbeth was a good kid. She didn't hang with the wrong crowd, she didn't get into things she wasn't supposed to, like drugs or anything like that, and she had big dreams. She was only 16, but her mom was already touring colleges with her, and Lizbeth had dreams of becoming a nurse. She was what any parent would want. As her mom told The Independent, 16-year-old Lizbeth was a loving, kind, and goofy teenager. So on December 5th of 2023, when she was a no-show to the Christmas parade, it made her mom worried. Her mom, Jacqueline, went back to their apartment, and that's when she made the shocking and devastating discovery. Emergency responders were called to the apartment where the teenager was found dead in her bathtub. Her mom previously told KAVU-TV, "Once I found her, I realized she was gone. Words can't explain what I felt at that moment, finding my daughter in the manner that she was. All I can say is I hope with all my heart that there is justice for my daughter. My daughter was found in a way that no mother should ever find her child. Someone hurt my child. Someone took my child from me." Lizbeth and her mom were very close. The teen was her only child. The two had reportedly only lived in the Edna community for about a year before her murder. So what was supposed to be a fresh start for them turned into a nightmare for Lizbeth's mom, Jacqueline. And Jacqueline was right. No one should ever find their child in the condition Lizbeth was found in. A 16-year-old stabbed to death in her own home and left to die in a bathtub. When the news came down of this gruesome murder, the community of Edna rallied together. But it might have crossed someone's mind at some point, was it possible one of their own killed the 16-year-old? Within days, Edna police released surveillance images of a man they believed could have been connected to Lizbeth's death. These images were released on December 8th of that year, 3 days after her murder. The statement read, quote, "Edna Police Department are seeking information regarding the investigation involving Lizbeth Medina. Preliminary investigations have revealed a person of interest and an associated vehicle. The male subject shown below may possibly have a tattoo located right behind his right ear and wearing a black Volcom hooded sweatshirt. He was seen driving a silver Ford Taurus, year model ranging from 2010 to 2018. We understand the photographs are not the best quality and are working to obtain any additional information to identify the person of interest." The police department asked anyone with information to give them a call, even offering a cash reward for information leading to an arrest. 2 days after those images were released by police, a major break in the case. Texas Rangers arrested a man they believed was responsible for Lizbeth's death. A then 23-year-old Rafael Romero was arrested about an hour northwest of Edna. Police reportedly seized evidence from the silver Taurus, the same car the person of interest was seen driving. Officers investigated whether Lizbeth and Rafael knew each other, or what the possible motive could have been for him to allegedly stab a teenager to death. Edna Police Chief Rick Boone said in a news statement, "Although Romero is apprehended, we recognize Lizbeth's family and friends are grieving and will still need support from the community." By January 5th of 2024, Rafael was indicted by a grand jury on capital murder. What was mysterious was the motive surrounding the shocking murder. According to Lizbeth's mother, their family didn't know or even recognize Rafael. Even after his arrest, officials didn't specify the motive. Lizbeth's mom previously told local news outlets prior to her daughter's murder, another apartment in their complex had a break-in. Interestingly enough, Rafael was reportedly on probation for a 2022 burglary in another town about 60 miles away from Edna. Edna police said that they believed he could also be tied to that burglary that happened a month prior to Lizbeth's killing. So is that what could have happened? Lizbeth at home getting ready for the Christmas parade, then her home is broken into and she's killed during the burglary? Lizbeth's mom was hoping a trial could help her get the answers she needed, but sadly, that never happened. In 2024, Rafael's attorneys filed motions for continuance. One of the motions was reportedly to get more time to go over the 400 gigabytes of information. Then in another motion, his defense filed a motion for evaluation of insanity by a behavioral health professional. His defense also argued his rights were violated during his arrest and during the investigation. They also filed a motion to suppress statements he made after his arrest, claiming the officers failed to properly deliver his Miranda rights. According to the arrest affidavit, Rafael confessed to Lizbeth's murder, and detectives found belongings of Lizbeth's in Rafael's bedroom. Even after he allegedly confessed, he was supposed to go on trial. That trial was originally slated to begin in August of this year, but that never happened. Court records reveal Rafael pleaded guilty to 3 charges in connection to Lizbeth's murder. He pled guilty to murder, aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon, and burglary of a habitation. This is a Law&Crime legal alert. There are allegations claiming that online apps like DraftKings and FanDuel are engineered for addiction. These multi-billion-dollar companies allegedly continue to put profit over safety. Every free bet, every boosted parlay, and every small payout triggers a dopamine rush that creates dependency and turns harmless fun into a detrimental habit. They keep you hooked, chasing impossible wins, and trap you in a cycle that can lead to significant financial loss and ultimately damage your mental health. Our legal sponsors are taking on the online gambling industry to potentially get compensation for all of those who have been impacted. So if you or your loved one has suffered addiction, financial hardship, or mental health issues due to sports betting apps, visit gamblinglawsuits.com/insidethecrime to take a short quiz and check your eligibility to file a claim. According to a report by The Independent, Lizbeth's mom first heard about the deal this week and was disheartened by the agreement. She also told Crossroads Today, "Words can't explain right now. I'm still in shock from the plea deal. From the beginning of this process, I made it clear that I wanted the max for this person who took my daughter's life away. That is the death penalty or life in prison. So the plea deal really came as a surprise." On Thursday, Rafael, now 25 years old, learned his fate. A judge handed down 2 life sentences, but they'll run concurrently or at the same time. Then he also received an additional 20 years for the burglary charge. So in essence, no chance of him ever being free again. Cameras reportedly were not allowed inside the courtroom during his hearing, but according to KPRC, Lizbeth's mom, Jacqueline, read an emotional victim impact statement. After Rafael learned his sentence, Lizbeth's mom told the news outlet, "It is something we've been waiting for over a year. Hearing those words, guilty, that's what we needed to hear." However, she was hoping for an even harsher sentence, telling the outlet, "The best option would have been life in prison without parole or the death sentence. But they have decided, and there's really nothing else we can do. And if he stays the rest of his life in prison, that's in God's hands now." So how did prosecutors reach this deal? Well, let's break it down further with criminal defense attorney Serena Townsend. Serena, always great to see you, and thank you so much for joining me. What's your reaction to Rafael Romero's sentence, 2 life sentences to run concurrently, plus a 20-year sentence just for burglary?
I mean, it sounds like it fits the crime. I think that the family was probably looking for even more than that. But the truth of the matter is, going to trial, even with solid evidence, is always going to be a risk. It just is. I mean, and there's also potential for so many appeals down the road. This kind of gives closure, even if the family doesn't necessarily feel it that way at this moment. In general, when you have something like that, a deal, a plea, he's going to take it, he's going to allocute, basically admit to what he did on the record. It does give a sense of, this is finally over. And I'm hoping that this plea, after so long, gives the family that feeling.
I absolutely do too. And it seems like from the reports that we were reading through that they didn't seem necessarily too keen on this plea deal, but hopefully with 2 life sentences running concurrently, maybe that feels like some form of justice. But when you do have a case like this, where there are so many unanswered questions, even as it goes back to the motive, and it seems like I had mentioned, the reports suggested that the family did want a trial, that they wanted those questions to be answered. So I'm curious, how and why do prosecutors even strike deals, especially when it seems like it was against the family's wishes? Is it because prosecutors just, might have been a little apprehensive about rolling that dice?
Yes, there's so many reasons to give a plea deal rather than go to trial, including the risk of going to trial and the judicial economy. But the bottom line is, a family may not even get those answers at trial. We all want answers, and it makes so much sense that the family wants that. But a defendant is not forced to take the stand. They're not forced to testify. And so, in that sense, the prosecution would have to handle this case potentially without being able to prove motive. Now, in order to get a conviction, you don't have to give the jury a motive. You don't have to. You just have to prove, that it was done and that it was done in a certain way by this person. But sometimes those questions are left unanswered, even when we think a trial might shed some light on those questions.
Yeah, because I was always curious about the motive in this case. Because I remember reporting on this case when it first happened back in December of 2023. And I was always wondering, it seemed like there was really no connection between the two, no relationship, no personal friendship, none of that sort. It really just seemed like just a random crime. And I'm curious, Serena, what your thoughts are on the crime as a whole. You have a 16-year-old girl stabbed to death inside her apartment, and the man accused of doing it, or the man who ended up pleading guilty to doing it, this was somebody who really didn't have any connections to her or her family or anything like that.
This is the most frightening type of crime anybody could ever encounter or witness, frankly. In my years of being a prosecutor and as a criminal defense attorney, so often there is a reason, there is a motive, there is a relationship. And I'm not, saying that that minimizes the victim's experience, but at the very least, one could picture, why something may or may not have happened in a certain way. Whereas here, you kind of hope that there's no such thing as the boogeyman, right? But this is what that is. It's like the parents warn kids, don't go into that strange white van, or don't, go to sleep without tucking your feet under the blanket. This is the stuff of nightmares, literal nightmares. So I don't know. It's very, very disconcerting when things like this happen. Thankfully, you don't see it happen as often. Usually, parties are known to each other, which oftentimes makes the crime easier to solve. But this is the most horrific possible thing that could have happened to this poor girl and her family.
And some reports were talking about Rafael possibly stalking Lizbeth, but I'm wondering, was Lizbeth just at home getting ready for the Christmas parade? Her mom was already out. She was at her job, then she was going to meet her down at the parade. And then her home was broken into, and it was just a crime of opportunity. What are your thoughts? And do you think possibly because prosecutors couldn't necessarily tie A, B, and C together, that maybe that's why they didn't want to bring this case in front of a jury for a trial?
Yeah, again, jurors really love to know why. And it's actually one of the things that prosecutors don't always have to prove is the why, but they want to know it. And sometimes a prosecutor feels like their case is not as strong if they can't give the jury that answer, because jurors want that. I do think, though, that as you mentioned in the beginning of that question, that she was probably in her most vulnerable state when this happened. I mean, she's supposed to be safe in her home, getting ready for such an innocent event, a Christmas party. She's a cheerleader, she's just getting ready. And it's just the most unbelievable violation for him to have done what he did. And it's scary because, again, without knowing why and knowing that connection, it's hard to know how to prevent those things for yourself and for your children in the future. God knows how long he was stalking her and how he was stalking her, and she just maybe didn't even realize it.
Yeah, and it's just so scary to think about too, because Lizbeth and her mom were just so new to the community too. I think they had only been living in Edna, Texas for about a year, coming, I think, from Nebraska prior to that. So it didn't seem like, what was supposed to be a fresh start ended up turning into a nightmare for that entire family. And as a criminal defense attorney, are you surprised that the defense filed so many motions, like motions for continuance or for an insanity evaluation or about his constitutional rights being violated, all for him to take a plea in the end?
I'm not surprised at all. It's a great question. I'm not surprised because, first of all, you do have to zealously advocate for your client, no matter how strong the evidence, no matter how you feel about your client. So those motions are pretty standard. And essentially, the defense attorneys are going to have to say something. I mean, it does sound like even though there was no motive, there was a pretty strong case against him. And the actual crime was so brutal that a jury is going to be eager to convict, in my opinion, in this type of case. And so, what a defense attorney has to try to do is really try to skirt issues and try to kind of figure out, how am I going to get my client either out of this completely or a lesser, punishment than what he could ultimately be facing. An insanity defense is one way, that you could try to fight something when everything else is pretty cut and dry. The what and the who, it sounds like were solved pretty readily. And so they're going to have to do something. Constitutional violations are another way to try to kind of chip at the strength of the case. And of course, a continuance is helpful because, in general, delay does help the defense. People forget things over time, they're less motivated. The heat, that was rising in the community for, punishment sometimes lessens. Although in this case, it does seem like everybody wanted the right thing to happen in the end for as long as this case was going.
And I really commend this community for really coming together and to support the Medina family, especially going through something just so tragic and devastating and gruesome such as this. And I know there are a lot of reports over Rafael's immigration status. He was undocumented after being in the U.S. on an expired visa. But do you think that changed anything in terms of his case not going to trial?
I don't think so. Look, this is a very hot topic, as you and I both know these days, and people have very, very strong opinions one way or another about his immigration status. I will say, though, that when you take a plea like this and you're not in the country legally, it does affect your ability to stay in the country under the law. And so a lot of what had to happen in order for the defense attorneys to explain to him what his rights are and what could potentially happen after taking such a plea, or even after getting convicted after trial, certainly had to involve immigration law. And they had to either confer with an immigration attorney or research it themselves, because this type of case where, I mean, it's clearly a crime of moral turpitude, which is kind of the big red flag when it comes to immigration cases, certainly will have an effect on his status here in America.
And Serena, my final question to you is, even though he's serving out 2 concurrent life sentences plus 20 years, do you think any possibility that, something may happen later on down the line, or does he waive every single right because he took this plea deal to not appeal his case?
Right. There's actually certain waivers of appeals that you have to sign off on when you take a plea in a case, but it never covers everything. There's always, always a way to appeal a conviction and even appeal or try to withdraw your plea. And so even though he has lesser opportunity than he would have if he had lost at trial, there are some areas where he could claim that he was, for example, maybe under duress, or as you mentioned before, he was arguing his capacity mentally. He could potentially argue that he wasn't in his right mind when he took the plea. It doesn't always work. It oftentimes does not get overturned, and oftentimes you don't get to withdraw your plea, even in those scenarios, but he could try. There are ways to try.
And it's interesting, too, because I know Lizbeth's mom was really hoping that he would get a harsher sentence, that there would be the words "without the possibility of parole" to be attached to that sentence to give them just a little more peace of mind, too. Well, Serena Townsend, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's unclear where Rafael Romero will be serving out his sentence. The district attorney's office says he also has an unrelated charge out of another county where he is still awaiting trial on that charge. Thanks so much for joining us here on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner.